Hi listeners, Jason here. We are excited to finally announce registrations for the biggest psych health and safety community event ever. The inaugural The Psych Health and Safety Conference will be held at the Sofitel Wentworth, Sydney, June 19 to 20, 2024 and offer concurrent virtual attendance. It'll feature live podcast recordings with OG researchers including Christina Maslach and Michael Leiter of Burnout fame, Psych Health and Safety USA podcast host I. David Daniels, Australian super experts including the likes of David Burrows, a special 10-year anniversary integrated approaches to workplace mental health panel with authors Tony LaMontagne, Angela Martin and Kat Page, hand-picked case studies from organisations doing it well, and a very special interview with plaintiff Zagi Kozarov by Catherine Dunlop on that High Court case which we previously covered on the podcast. This event will sell out. Get in quick to secure tickets at early bird prices for the 2-day conference, pre-conference masterclasses, and the VIP dinner. The first 200 in-person registrations also get a copy of her latest book, The Burnout Challenge, signed by Christina Maslach herself. Find out more and register at www.psychhealthandsafetyconference.com. Now, on to this episode.
Psychologically unhealthy places and spaces can often test a person's moral and ethical standards and even leave people lacking the will to succeed, to maintain their social connections, or even to live. We'll talk with an educator, social entrepreneur, keynote speaker, and mental health advocate whose lived experience has led to becoming a voice for psychologically safer workplaces. Up next on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. As workplace mental health has become a global priority, there's a greater focus on addressing psychosocial hazards. Each episode, we look at psychological safety from an occupational health and safety perspective. Let's talk Psych Health and Safety. Welcome to this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. So for some people, exposure to a psychologically unsafe environment, particularly chronic exposure to psychosocial hazards and risks, brings to things, particularly when they're happening early in their lives, can affect them well into their adulthood. While these experiences leave deep emotional scars, they can also become the fuel that drives people to want to make a difference in the world. We have the pleasure of talking to someone whose experiences have become motivation, not only for him to accomplish, but to encourage others and to become an advocate for environments where people can be themselves and be in safe places and spaces. And we're going to get right into it because I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. Share a little bit about how I came across our guest some months ago, had opportunity to speak in favor of a bill that's being introduced in the state of Massachusetts. And it is the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. And one of the speakers just really impressed me. And I'll be honest, the other thing that I was a bit surprised to see is to see another male having these conversations, because they tend to be had by women. And so it was just really impressive. So I reached out to him and we had a conversation, and he consulted to come on to the podcast. So let's get to it, as I so often do, with an introduction of my guest, by my guest, with this question. So who is Dr. S.L. Young?
Well, who am I? That's a good question because it's a work in progress, right? And so we have different roles and responsibilities and ways that we represent ourselves at different phases of our lives. The current iteration of Dr. S.L. Young is someone who is compassionate, who cares about others, who spends a lot of his time giving back, but also is a passionate educator who works with students and adults, but not just to teach the traditional things that we might learn. I teach business, so I teach a lot in the business curriculum, but I also talk to people about the things that folks don't necessarily want to discuss. And those are some of the things that aren't necessarily the happy conversations. And I want to bring through my lived experiences validation that it's okay to have real conversations, because what we're doing is being authentic about ourselves and the things that we've lived. So part of my current iteration of myself is talking openly and honestly and boldly about my experiences as someone who nearly ended his life almost 10 years ago, to now. And also to discuss the impacts of workplace bullies and the impact that they have on others' lives. Because the easiest thing to do should be to tell the truth, do the right thing. But unfortunately, in too many workplaces and those that I worked, there were a lot of unethical workplace bullies who wanted me to be complicit to their activities that were against my morals, my values, and my judgments. And in doing that, it led to hardships that I never imagined, but it created the man that I am today because I chose to willingly fight back against and climbed a very tough mountain to tell the stories that I'm telling. Because what I've learned through my stories and what gives me power today is that my story is not the only one that's out there. And there are so many individuals that come to me privately and say, thank you for standing up for us. Because for whatever reason, they choose not to, but rightfully so, because if you look at my experiences, when I stood up against unethical workplace bullies, it led to me losing everything, including nearly my life, because I couldn't obtain jobs for whatever reasons. And so that's a powerful motivator for people to be silent, but I will not be silent. I will not be complicit, and I will be an advocate to drive changes, because this isn't just about the workplace, it's about people's lives and an impact to their psyche. And I will not stand on the sidelines and watch it happen without actively fighting back.
Okay. Okay, we're going to get into some of that. I got to tell you, because that's it's actually really exciting to to hear a voice such as yours speaking in the way that you do about your experiences, and many of them, at least they sound somewhat familiar. So, but before we get into a little more detail, tell me, what does psychological health and safety mean to you?
Well, simply put, it allows individuals to be protected in their workspaces, but to show up authentically and not have to adjust themselves to comply with forced cultures that aren't necessarily productive, positive, or impactful. So when we are in environments where we cannot authentically show up as ourselves because the culture or individuals within the culture are given permission to abuse, dismiss, and devalue the contributions of others, it prevents the organization from growing and maximizing its complete benefit. Because if you have one facet of the organization that is basically hammering others down so that they can stand up, yes, you might elevate aspects of the organization, but at the same time, at the detriment to other people and their lives and their futures. And the things that happen to us inside of the workplace aren't just limited to what happens there. We carry that, even though people in the workplace might not see it. We carry those feelings, those experiences home with us. And then it becomes part of our psyche, our mental health, our overall well being that manifests itself in a lot of different ways. It can be stress, it can be overeating, it can be abusive behavior, it can be a whole lot of things. So we have to understand that our psyche is not just tied to the workplace, and we don't just close it off when we leave. It also carries over to all other aspects of our life. So to be in a positive environment in which you can be psychologically safe is really about authenticity and not forcing people to submit or to comply to things, especially when they are against ethical norms and standards. I could go into a lot more, but I'll just stop there because there's so much we could discuss related to this topic.
Well, so here's the connection. The connection to at least the foundational conversation we tend to have on this podcast is the concept of a psychosocial hazard, which is a psychosocial factor that's perceived or experienced by the person exposed as a threat that motivates them to behave in a particular way. It is that perception or experience of threat that is totally unique to us. Because what is a threat to me and what is a threat to you could be two totally different things. And and when I bring this up, there are those who might say that that's kind of putting a lot of responsibility on the organization and kind of throwing rocks at people. It is not. It is not. It is a reality that different people perceive different circumstances as threatening to them. But here's the challenge: as long as we have this idea about bringing human beings together to accomplish anything, no matter what it is, whether that be a relationship or a business or to train or to do education or to play, to whatever it is. When humans interact, when you bring them, when they come together in whatever environment, both parties or all parties in that environment that feel threatened will feel unsafe as well. And so it doesn't, I'm not saying that it was set up to be threatening to anybody. I'm not saying it was set up to, to be negative to a particular person, but it can be. And the issue is when we make it clear that it is threatening to us. When a person says, this doesn't feel good to me, it doesn't work for me, I don't really agree with that, that's when the real work begins. Now, what do we do? Because again, there are folks who will say, well, we put this program together. We thought it was going to work for everybody. Yeah, you thought, but it doesn't. None of us are perfect. So not everything is going to work for everyone. So what do they do? And let me ask you this. When you went into the workforce early on, at whatever point that you went, what were you thinking the workforce was going to be like, just in general? What did you think when you first started working that work was going to be about?
Well, I didn't have an expectation about what the work environment was going to be like. But what I did know was what society had represented itself as. And I had an expectation that I would be treated with dignity, with respect. And fortunately for me, for the majority of my career, that was the case. However, when I decided to be a consultant and I was not protected by company policies and procedures as if you as the same protections that you would get if you were an employee, it allowed for people who knew how to operate within the system to do the things that they wanted to do because they knew that if you said anything, or the individual receiving it knew that if they said anything, they could be quickly removed. And when you're trying to take care of yourself, your family, and generate income in the process, that's a powerful motivator to be silent. On the other side of that, if you're in an organization in which you're an individual that you are having an uncomfortable situation with someone oftentimes will say, well, why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you say something? Well, this isn't that easy all the time because not everybody is willing to be confrontational, or they're not willing to defend themselves, or they see the person as being in a power position and then they must be subservient to them, and then they don't say anything. At the same time, when individuals don't stand up for themselves for whatever reason, what happens is there's an outside circle looking in, and those other folks see what's happening to a particular individual or individuals within the organization. And then all of a sudden they say, well, you know what? I'm not going to get involved because I don't want that to happen to me. And so by operating in that type of environment where an individual doesn't have protections, that others see that individual being attacked in whatever form, and then they make a decision to not get involved. And then it continues to grow within the organization because depending on the level of power of that individual within the organization, a lot more people would be willing to be silent because they don't want to experience the wrath, which could lead to not getting income or promotions and not getting um, great opportunities to work on that next great project. So when we're in environments that are not supportive and don't allow individuals to speak up to say something is not right here, I do not feel safe for whatever reason, it allows for negative cultures to emerge and grow. And what ends up happening is that individuals who are attacking others become more powerful. They become more powerful because nobody else is challenging them. One of the things that I've documented in some of my work is that when we talk about these type of individuals, we're talking about people that are harassers, workplace bullies. And what I like to say is they like to hit. Oh, actually, they like to pick and they like to hit. So these type of people like to use their power, influence, and control to harass, intimidate, and threaten. So when we don't address the opportunities for people to leverage their power, influences, and control as a weapon against others, then that allows for an environment in which individuals are openly willing to harass, intimidate, and threaten. Because if there aren't any repercussions for their actions, then it allows them to operate freely, especially if they are considered to be superstars or senior leaders in the organization. People are less willing to speak out.
Wow. Power, influence, and control. I don't believe that those concepts are inherently negative. Would you agree? I mean, power.
How you use it.
It's how you use they're tools.
Yeah, exactly.
They're simply tools. And again, sometimes you do hear these discussions where folks kind of, those positions of power that just draws negative people. No, no, no. Power, influence, and control are tools to be used however people want to use them. And the challenge is for me, that at least I've observed, is that sometimes people of goodwill that want to treat others with dignity and respect and want to be kind to others don't pursue power, don't pursue influence, don't pursue control because they think it's kind of inherently negative. It is not. It is, again, how you use the tool. A hammer can be used for all kinds of things. It really can. It probably shouldn't be used on screws, though. That's when you need a screwdriver. So it just doesn't mean it's negative. So you mentioned that you didn't have a particular expectation about the workforce in general, but did have these kind of societal beliefs about how you should be treated. That likely comes up from your family, from the people you've been around, all that type of thing. So, can you share a circumstance or a situation where it looked like it was a little bit inconsistent, a little bit off, so something didn't seem right?
Well, but let's take a back step for a moment, because power is influence and control are things that managers and leaders use. Individuals can use them as well, but we have to recognize when do we need to use them, because some people believe that the only solution is to always use a hammer. When if you learn how to use your interpersonal skills and understand individuals by also applying empathy, leveraging emotional intelligence. And you cannot treat people the exact same way. You can treat them with equity and equality, because there's different ways that you need to approach different people. Some people are introverts, some people are extroverts, some people are more sensitive. And so you, as a leader or as an individual who is working with others, you have to understand these attributes of working in dynamic organizations and figure out, how do I adjust myself? And it's not saying that you're being two-faced, but it's being sensitive. It's being empathetic to the needs of others before we focus on driving the needs of ourselves onto them. And so that is sort of the thing that happens for me in the things that I saw. Just some quick examples. I mean, I've had the extreme, from people just being challenged because they wanted to represent themselves a certain way. So they would create these large empires or organizations of consultants that came in weren't doing any work, but that allowed them to demonstrate that they had power by number of people. On the other side, I've had extremes where I've had a new manager move into my desk to as a power play, and somebody happened to call me while I was out on vacation or working vacation in another country, and I got a phone call the night before from a former manager that says, "Hey, don't want you to walk into this, but I want you to know before you come back that our new manager moved into your desk." And so I've seen the extremes, and I've seen instances where just on an interpersonal level, where I personally, where an on-site director, where I was a consultant, at the end of my time, turned her back to me whenever I spoke. It's like, why are you still talking? You're about to leave. We don't want to hear what you have to say. And I've seen leaders within an organization, a senior leader, say to a director, senior director, actually within an organization, slam his fist on the table and say, "Why are you talking? You don't need to say another word," essentially. And so I've also seen in these environments that I'm describing, good people sit on the sidelines and they don't say anything because the psychological impact is to their personal safety, their workplace safety, but also the opportunities that might be presented to them that could impact all of those things. So when we were talking about organizations that we want to show up in authentically, we want those organizations to have policies and procedures that allow individuals to be protected, but more importantly to the policy, I won't say more importantly, but the policies and procedures are really important, right? But you also have to have the mechanism, an effective mechanism that is used. So whenever someone does not feel safe in their workplace, they have an opportunity to address it outside of their span of control. So with outside of their management chain, where people can come in and say, "This is what happened to me and I need assistance." And they are not put in a position where they're trying to combat with the person who's being combative with them. And so creating a psychologically safe environment allows us to openly express ourselves. It allows us to escalate whenever necessary when we are in positions where we are not being treated with respect. But it also should allow for third parties to come in and independently assess whenever there is a conflict that could potentially be could potentially exist within the environment. So we have to look at psychological safety from a perspective of the individual, the organization, the company, the culture that's being created in all of those organizations, but stand that up against policies, procedures, enforcement. And you have to demonstrate that whenever there are issues within an organization where people are not safe, that you are taking it seriously, you are acting on it timely, and there is some type of consequence for people who do not comply or others who are complicit that must be communicated within the organization. Not saying that you communicate what happened to a particular person, but oftentimes we'll know if someone suddenly is no longer there, or we'll have an idea something occurred. But we need to make sure that we're not doing things behind closed doors and then people are saying, well, they never addressed this, they never addressed that. We have to be open in the things that are occurring to address issues that exist in the organization and then use those as examples to communicate to the teams. These are examples of things that we will not permit within this organization. And if you do these things, this will be the consequences. And you continue to evolve your policies and procedures over time and to make sure that you have actionable remedies that are also being reviewed over time to see if you need to do anything different.
Right. Yeah, there are a variety of reasons why it's important to have conformity within groups. There's for people to conform because for you and I, for a group that we're in, for an organization to achieve a goal, whatever that goal is, people are going to have to conform in some way and contribute, in ways that are going to help the organization or the group or the team achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve. And sadly, when we start talking about how the human beings are treated, what we end up with is we can't get sometimes even basic compliance. And compliance is a much different uh, level of conformity than commitment. And,
But what
and
you're
we,
talking about,
it,
I'm sorry to jump in really quickly, but what you're talking about is conformity often leads to complicity.
yes,
That's the problem.
yes,
And so we don't want an organization where everybody conforms. We want individuals to be authentic,
yes.
but also be empowered to address issues, regardless of level.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the FlourishDX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow FlourishDX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the FlourishDX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
Yes, yes. And again, be able to be again so when the advertisement went out for the position or for the job or for the contract or whatever it is, an organization says this is what we're looking for. And so they have whatever selection process. Some selection processes mean, people know each other. They call and say, hey, come over and do that thing, whatever that thing is. But I just find it so interesting and that's why I asked the question earlier about, did you have any expectations about the organizations you went into? Honestly, my expectation was whatever they told me, because I can't say I had one of my own because I never did that before. But they said it was going to be this way. So they said, oh, it's going to be a family here. And, oh, we care about one another. Oh, no, this is what the rules are. Then you get inside the organization, you find out, well, those are the written rules, but nobody follows them. But literally, virtually nobody follows them, which is, I was in an organization a little over a decade ago, went into the organization and found out they were engaged in federal tax evasion. Of course, they didn't have that on the logo. It says, hey, we're we're breaking a federal law. Nobody will say that. No organization puts on their advertisement, oh, we harass people here. We treat people horribly. Nobody will say that. So they say one thing, that there's what's shown on the outside, and then there's what really goes on. And it's certainly my view that they should be the same thing. And if there is something that the organization does that's going to be difficult, that has the potential even to cause harm to people. Again, I was in the fire rescue service. I knew that if I went into a building on fire, there's a chance I'd get injured or killed. They didn't hide that. They were very clear about that. Fire's hot. But so again, if I take this to other businesses and organizations, it's as if folks won't be honest about the way they really are, and then when you find it out, it's like, well, how dare you challenge that? You challenge it because authentically, that's not the person you were when you came there. You came there because you wanted to do a great job. You want to contribute. You want to be able to place your skills in the hopper, place your ideas on the table, and be a part of what's going on. But you don't want to do it stealing, mistreating people, abusing other people. That's just not something that you want to do. And sometimes even when you do that, you become a greater target of those, or of systems that just want to have those things go on and leave them unchecked, which is kind of sad.
Well, what's interesting is that a lot of organizations do not communicate or convey in any way that there should be a psychological contract that exists between individuals and organizations. And that's why some people are against employment at will, some people are in support of it. But that is part of the psychological contract. If I come into an organization and I do not feel like I'm being treated fairly, I have the free will to leave. On the other side, if an organization doesn't feel that I'm a good cultural fit, they have a right to ask me to exit the premises. So those things are part of the psychological contract that exists. However, there are times that we have to use our emotional intelligence, our experiences, and examine things as we're coming in the door, because often there are telltale signs, but we overlook them because we're looking for opportunities. So if you come in and they're throwing you haphazardly around to different people for an interview, there's no process or procedures in the way that they're doing the interview process. There's a clue that there might be something a little bit off here. Or you go in for an interview, and this is a case I remember. I was in an interview, and they the team was saying, well, sometimes the leader in this organization will basically reprimand you, and this is the way. So like, it was just the way that they described it, and I was like, no, that doesn't sound like that is a good place for me to be. So I finished the interview, but I was like, don't even bother calling. In my mind, don't bother calling me, because you're telling me that the leader of this organization is abusive, and you just sort of take it because that's just how it is. And in so many organizations, that's what happens. And people become comfortable with abusive behavior. And that goes into something that I testified about when we were together a few months ago, is that oftentimes what happens in organizations is that no one is willing to speak up, because the consequences of voicing popular truths that are unspoken is given greater consideration and value than protecting the emotional well-being of the individuals that reside in those organizations. And that's the underlying truth. And what we're told when we come into organizations is develop thick skin. So that says, whatever's going on here, get used to it, toughen up. And if you're not tough enough, get over yourself. And not saying, well, why is someone being led to feel this way or that way? And as a leader, if someone comes to me and says, I am not feeling safe in this environment, I am being emotionally abused, I am being mentally abused, and God forbid, I'm being physically abused, you need to do some level of investigation. I've seen too many times with myself and others where people just dismiss it and are like, you know what, you're just being a little soft. And that is not a reasonable or actionable response to someone saying, I have an issue and I need you to get involved. So, what you tell individuals when you say, go fend for yourself, is the organization or the manager or whoever has the power is saying, we don't care about you or your feelings. And that's the thing that needs to change. And that's why I'm really happy that more states are trying to push forward legislation to create psychologically safe work environments. And some people will say, well, we can't do that because it'll lead to a lot of lawsuits. How do we manage someone's psychological health and well being? Well, we do it in a lot of different areas. If someone was to say that they were being sexually harassed, sexual intimidation, sexual violence, whether someone's actually put their hands on them or not, it's interesting that we can find a way to understand how do we measure that or to determine the impact of that. And I think it is in Quebec, Canada, that they have had a law on the books for over a decade now where they deal with psychologically safe workplaces, and they're actually seeking to extend that even further now to include sexual abuse, if I remember correctly. So there are benchmarks that can be referenced that how this can be managed. And far as I know, there hasn't been an overwhelming abundance of lawsuits that have been filed, because what happens when there's an ability to legally defend yourself is organizations will be more active and proactive and taking actions to minimize the potential damage. Why do we have to wait until we're worrying about minimizing damages for you to take actions to protect someone's emotional health and well-being before you do damage that might lead to them unnecessarily ending their life, like I nearly did, and like a professor um, did earlier this year at a historically Black college and university,
Yes,
where
I'll call
she
Lincoln University.
Lincoln
Yes,
University.
yes, yes.
And, she had reported she had been in the job, I believe, less than a year. She, and I can just imagine what's going on. You're new in your job. Maybe she relocated to a different area. You don't want to say anything. You're like, oh, I've got this job. I don't want to lose this job. Because when you're up in the executive levels, it's not as easy to necessarily jump around or to stay at that level. And she's probably like, I don't have any friends in this organization. How am I going to, how are people going to perceive me if I start complaining about the stuff that's happening? So now she's become isolated. Then she goes to their version, I think it was the regents, but their board of directors, and said, hey, I have an issue. And their response, allegedly, is that they responded by saying, we don't get involved with personnel issues. And, I have to, just to cover myself here, I'm saying all of what I'm describing here is alleged based on the descriptions that have been reported in the media. But she also, after she reported it to their board of directors, she supposedly requested time off under family and medical
Family
leave,
medical leave. Yeah.
which was reportedly denied based on news reports that she didn't get it. And then at the beginning of this year, she was reportedly, allegedly, terminated from her job. And then days later, she ended up ending her life. If any of that is true, at the point that she said that I am being abused by someone within the organization, that is the point where there should be an investigation. You don't tell someone, we don't deal with personal issues. Even if you don't deal with personal issues, you give it to someone who
That's right.
does.
The organization needs to. The
Right.
organization needs to. Yes.
And then she asked for medical leave, allegedly, and that was denied. And so if someone is saying they've already reported that I'm having issues, and now they're saying they're having a, a health issue. Why did it take this woman getting to a point where she felt that she needed to end her life for attention to be taken? Because once she ended her life, then action was taken
Yes.
um, to do something to intervene. And so, just to cover myself one more time, these are all allegations that are made, that are reported openly in the press. So we don't know what the true facts are, but we do know that this woman is no longer with us. That part we do know.
And I find even this conversation and the way we end up having it sometimes is just I wonder why it's that way. Why is it that we have systems in place that make it difficult for us to even talk about what happened to people when they, are being bullied, mistreated, and God forbid, in some cases, feeling so helpless and so downtrodden that their lives end up being over, and the focus is always on the individual and what they did or what they did not do, and not on the system that created that environment. I would argue, even before there should have been an investigation of abuse allegations, what about when a human being comes to the place where they exchange their skill for compensation? Some people call them employees. When that person says, I don't feel good, why not at that point? Why do we have to wait until the person feels like, now I'm feeling abused? This doesn't feel good to me. There's something that appears to be wrong in this situation. Why don't we start there? Why don't we start? Because so many of these issues. So again, if all of this is accurate as media has reported it so far, what would have happened had the first time she brought up, when you speak to me in that way, I feel, here's how it makes me feel. And the person who spoke to her, whether it be the president or whoever else it was, simply changed the way they communicated with her.
Or
What?
someone could communicate it to them.
Abs-
How you're communicating with her is inappropriate or might
Absolutely.
need to be adjusted.
Yes, absolutely. But again, it starts with just it's a one-on-one thing. When I said, why isn't that enough? Why do I have to get a third party or your boss to get you to stop treating me in a way that feels unsafe to me? So again, it starts even at that level. When I say, so a lot of the data that folks use to try to address psychosocial hazards is they want to read my dissertation, or they want to go out and find a longitudinal study, or You don't need that. The data that you need comes from the human being who says, this doesn't feel safe to me. That is enough to react in some way other than the one that the one that you're using at the time, because that person is telling you at that point that this doesn't work for them. And had that conversation been had, and had that been acknowledged by both parties, we may not be having this conversation right now. But I don't want to pass up the opportunity. If you could, you know what she was feeling.
But before we get there, because I want to sort of step into that,
Please,
one of the things
please.
that I want to mention is because you asked a question, how do we get to a point that we can't communicate, that we allow these types of things to happen? Well, you know part of the answer to that. And part of the answer actually starts societally. Because what are we taught as children? Because there's a famous phrase that a lot of people know. And when I say it, they're like, oh, yeah, I remember. What happens? Snitches
Get
get
stitches.
stitches. So we're told if we speak up, something violent can happen to us. So we are being taught to remain silent. We also know that the nail that sticks up
So when it gets hammered down.
gets hammered down, right? And another consideration, since we're two Black men, is that what's wrong with you? Why aren't you man enough to handle this? What are you talking about? Someone's like doing this or this. Um, and so there's that toxic masculinity, and especially in the Black communities, at least in the US Black communities, right? There's these cultural norms that are built into us early on. Because I remember as a child falling down and scraping my knee and starting to cry. No, you don't cry. And so we're not allowed as men, especially as Black men, to emote how we're feeling or to express that we're being quote unquote sensitive. And so that is part of the issue. So now we can sort of answer the question where I think you're going.
Yes, yes. Well, you're absolutely correct. As when we go into a social setting with people that are not our family, whether it be work or school or wherever it is, we bring all of those things with us. And it is impossible to know the list, how deep they are, how significant they are. It's impossible to know. But it's really easy. It's a lot easier to know when the person says it, when the person communicates to you that, that doesn't work for me. And even how do you create an environment where people feel that they can? Part of
Cultural
it,
awareness. Cultural awareness.
part of it in an organization is simply saying it when the person comes to this, or generally, when you go to an organization that has an effective safety program, what they will tell you is, we have a safety program here. We really want to hear. Whether they really do or not, it's not the point. The fact is that it's said that it is, we need, if you see something, to say something, and you reinforce that, and you try to create environments where people, when they do speak up, that there aren't negative consequences of retaliation. So I'm not suggesting this is easy at all, and I don't think you are either. But uh, both of us came to a spot in our lives when we decided that the pain that we were experiencing was such that we needed to speak up about it, regardless to what we had been told. I'll speak for I was told that when I was younger. But as I got older, as I become an adult myself, I go, that doesn't work for me, and I need to speak up for myself. And if this is not an environment that's going to allow me to do that, I need to find a different environment, because that's not going to work for me. I'm not suggesting that everyone gets there quickly, but it's doable, it's possible. And there are options that don't necessarily involve me turning that pain back in on myself, and looking at myself as something other than the glorious creation that I was made to be.
But the problem is we're told to conform. And all of our lives, we're told that we need to fit into the environment. When in Rome, do as the Romans. We've heard that before. The other part of it, and when some of us who are a little bit bolder that are willing to speak truth to power, I remember being in one organization and they had diversity training. They had policies and procedures on diversity. They were committed, at least out of their mouths to diversity. Well, sometimes I can be a rebel with or without a cause. And so I asked the obvious question that other people weren't willing to ask. In the training, I said, so this organization is saying that they're committed to diversity and that this is so important that they're taking us aside and allocating time for training. Answer this question for me. If this organization is so committed to diversity, then why are the positions over the senior management level in this organization not diverse? They didn't have an answer to that. So you get lip service. And when you get lip service, then people say, so the ones that speak up, they get knocked down. Other people speak up and they get ignored. So then people say, well, that's just the way it is. And guess what? We're back to conformity again. So it's a cycle. It's a cycle. It's a vicious cycle.
It is. It is. It is. Wow. Well, I am beginning to observe, um, even culturally, that from a generational perspective, I should say, that there are folks who they're not buying it the way even my generation did and generations, but they just they see it differently, and they're willing to conform, but only to a point. I'll show up. I'll show up generally on the days that you expect me to be here, but that's a line too far when you ask me to be. When I have to change the color of my hair, when I can't wear it in certain ways, where I can't eat certain things, where I have to. There's people have lines in terms of what they're willing to conform to, and there are folks now that, having experience working from their homes for 2 or 3 years, are not willing they're not willing to go into an office environment. And it's not just because of the commute. Some of it is because of the psychological environment. Some of it is because it doesn't feel safe there. And I can actually do safer and better quality work at a distance because of the environment that exists there. So, well, I'm just seeing more of this, um, and I'm encouraged by it, to be quite honest. That there are more people who are kind of going like, I don't know if I want to do that. And again, folks such as yourself who share, and we're still in this conversation. I'm starting to run out of time, but I really want. You have written 9 books talking about your experiences and sharing this information with other people. And I'd argue that folks such as yourself are a part of the reason that things are changing, because people are starting to go, well, hold up. I saw this guy I think I heard him on a podcast or on YouTube, and he said that he decided that he was going to do things different, and he did feel down at one point, but now he's out encouraging others. Those examples can sometimes be what it takes for people to go like, if he can do it, so can I.
Absolutely. And so it's part of starting a chain of action, right? And a chain starts with a spark, because the folks that I dealt with that created environments that weren't psychologically safe for me, they were winning when they knocked me down, but they didn't realize that I wasn't going to stay down. Excuse me. And that I would come back up and I would be a voice and I would take my lived experiences. And even when I started to share my lived experiences, I had friends and family say to me, that's your private story. Don't you share that with anyone. But the reason I wanted to share my story is because I knew it was happening to others. And I remember in one organization in particular, one leader said to me afterwards, when this leader was no longer at the organization anymore, said, I didn't know what that bullying was until it happened to me. And it shouldn't have to wait until it happens to someone else. But I have to make this point because I would be remiss if I did not. This is the reason that diversity, equity, and inclusion are important, because where we started off this conversation, I used the word authenticity, people being authentic. And when you allow people to show up as themselves and to be comfortable in expressing themselves, because the culture is permissive of individual expressing things that are not correct, that are not working, or that need to be adjusted. When they can be comfortable speaking truth to power, that is when real change begins.
Yes. No, I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Wow. Um, I just don't know uh, uh, how how did we get to this point to where someone, and you mentioned it earlier, someone who got right to the point of considering ending their own life, how these all these years later, and again, I watched one of the clips from your website where you talked about how it's exciting it is for you now to be referred to as Dr. Young, when there were folks back in the day who told you don't even stay in school. And also there were all of these things that seem to have been weighted against you. But over the course of time, you've been able to, despite them, to be able to stand on your own, stand in your own strength, should I say, and now being able to share, those experiences with other people. I just think that's fascinating. Sometimes I wonder, how does that even happen? Because you see so many cases when it doesn't.
And that's why I'm out here not only talking about psychologically safe workplaces or workplace bullying, but also talking about challenges and letting folks know it's okay to experience challenges. My challenges made me better. It made a better me, and it allowed me to see things in ways that I never imagined by continuing to move forward during my toughest days. And I just want to say this just in case anybody is having a tough moment, because the day that I nearly ended my life, I thought I was being strong by holding everything back to the point that I was about to break. And I called my brother on the day that I nearly ended my life. And the only thing I wanted to say is, because I was my mother's caregiver, is in the event that something happens to me, I just want to know that mom will be taken care of. Now imagine making that call knowing you were at your wits' end and you wanted to die. But I actually didn't want to die. I just wanted the pain to go away. But fortunately, he realized that I was a medical emergency. So I just want to say to anyone out there that if you believe that things aren't going well, talk to somebody about it. And if you can't find someone in your immediate community, find someone online, find a help center, call a number and speak to someone, because I want you to know that you're not alone, because it would have been a travesty, excuse me, if I had ended my life nearly 10 years ago. We're less than a month now from it being 10 years. And life does go on, but you don't need to be abused by anyone. You can speak up and let your voice be heard, because your voice matters. And if you're ever feeling sad, go help somebody else, just one person. And trust me, it makes a difference.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm really thankful. We had opportunity to have one of my guests is kind of behind the scenes with the recently established 988 line that people can call. Those Some of those resources didn't exist a decade ago, but they're there. There are, again, just people such as yourself who have a lived experience who can share their. So as much as, again, when the podcast started, I wondered if the United States was ever going to get there, whether or not we were ever going to get to the point to where there were people even talking about psychologically healthy and safe workplaces. And a year and a half later, it seems, and I don't at all want to suggest that it's only this effort, but I'm finding so many efforts and so many people who are really interested in this idea, and it's happening faster than it probably happened in some of the other countries, because there are 36 countries in the world, Canada being one of them, with their uh, psychological health and safety standards, been around since 2013. Australia, who has some very strong laws, the UK, and places around the world, they're there. But you know what? I think we are moving in the right direction. I really do. And I believe that, efforts such as the Workplace Psychological Safety Act and the Healthy Workplace Bill, and other efforts that are out there right now, that folks are advocating on behalf of more psychologically healthy and safe workplaces. I think the seed is planted. I think some of the sprouts are starting to come up, and I think it's going to grow a lot faster than we expected. And it needs continued fertilization and support from folks just like you. And so as just before we close, I wanted to give you a moment to give us a closing thought. And as you're giving us a closing thought, please share some information about how people could follow up with you should they want to or need to. So, what closing thoughts?
Yeah. So, we've covered so much, it's hard to sort of summarize. But what I will say is you do not need to remain in environments where you're being abused in any shape, form, or fashion. And being silent does not mean being strong. So if something is going on in your environment, if you're not feeling right about something, excuse me, make sure you tell someone, even if it's not within your family, it's not within the organization that you're in. There's somebody out there that can assist. So, like you said, we're making progress because you're part of that conversation too, and changing how we view the treatment of people within the organization to ensure that people aren't unnecessarily being abused, because there are so many people that are being silent about the abuse because they believe that they're being strong because that's how they've been conditioned. And being silent and not speaking truth to power is not a way to drive change. So I hope through this conversation that we've had today that people will be more encouraged to speak out and share their truths so that we can drive change, because the more people that are aware, the more power that we have collectively. And then finally, what I'll say is if folks want to connect with me, again, my name is Dr. S.L. Young, and you can go to my website at SLYOUNG.com. So it's been a pleasure, and thank you very much for having me on your show.
Well, yeah, thanks, Dr. Young, for this really real, really really a passion-filled conversation that we've been able to have. It's good to be able to have these discussions with real people
Absolutely.
and again talk authentically about what's really going on, as you said, and you're not the only one. But
And don't
hope
be afraid to show up as yourself
absolutely,
every day.
absolutely. I'll say this. Dr. King, in his letter from the Birmingham jail in 1963, suggested that the issues weren't so much about the folks that were identified as quote unquote the bad people. They're them speaking out and doing the things that they were doing, but he said it was the appalling silence of the good people that was really the issue. And so when you talk about speaking up, that's the thought that comes to my mind, is that good people really should speak up first about themselves, but also about others in the environments that they're in, because it's our environment, it's our organization, it's our team, it's our planet, it's our world. And sometimes the most selfish thing we can do is to speak up for somebody else.
And one last thing that I would just want to add really quickly is while you're looking out your window, make sure that if it's not clear or something doesn't look right, that you fix it before your own window gets cracked.
Right. Thanks, Doc. Thanks so much. And if you're watching this episode on the Flourish DX YouTube page, please do like, subscribe, and share. If you are watching or listening to the podcast for the first time, welcome. I hope that something you heard will bring you back in the future. Previous episodes of this podcast can be found at psychealthandsafetyusa.com. And we're certainly encouraging you to become a part of the Psych Health and Safety USA movement by connecting to us on LinkedIn. We certainly thank you for the honor and pleasure and opportunity to share time with you. And hopefully you'll join us on the next episode coming up soon of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Thanks very much. Tune in each Friday for new episodes of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you have a story or know of one that needs to be told, reach out to us on LinkedIn or send an email to david@id2-solutions.com or go to the Flourish DX website at flourishdx.com. We'll see you next time.